On my daughter's wedding day, my wife and I saw our faces on a laminated poster at the venue gate. Below our photos, "These people not allowed, security risk." My daughter had banned us from the wedding we'd paid for with our life savings. I stood there for 10 seconds. Then I got back in my car, opened my contacts, and made 3 phone calls. By noon, her wedding had collapsed. I'm grateful you're listening. Before I take you back to that morning, tell me where you're watching from. What time is it there? Drop a comment. Let's connect. I woke at 5:30 in the morning to find Cassidy already dressed. She stood by the bedroom window in her brown dress, the one she'd bought on sale 3 years ago and saved for special occasions. The fabric was simple, unadorned, but she wore it with the kind of quiet dignity that had always made me proud. Outside, the sky over Detroit was still dark, streaked with the pale orange glow of streetlights. "You're up early," I said. She turned to me and smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had spent 40 years managing kitchens, coordinating deliveries, and making sure every wedding cake came out perfect. "Big day," she said simply. I nodded. Big day. Our daughter Maureen was getting married. I got out of bed and reached for my suit, the same navy blazer I'd worn to every major event for the past decade. Cassidy had ironed it the night before. The creases were sharp enough to cut. It wasn't new. It wasn't expensive. But it was clean, and it was mine. By 6 o'clock, we were in the kitchen. Cassidy had her checklist spread out on the counter: pheasants, French linens, orchids. She'd gone over it 100 times in the past 3 months, calling suppliers, negotiating prices, double-checking every detail. I'd been coordinating events for 40 years, but watching my wife work was like watching a master conductor lead an orchestra. She didn't miss a note. "Everything's confirmed," she said, tapping the paper with her pen. "Tony has the catering trucks ready. Henry confirmed the estate is set up. The flowers arrived last night." I poured us both coffee. "And the money transferred yesterday," Cassidy said. Her voice was steady, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. $75,000, our entire life savings. $30,000 from me. $25,000 from Cassidy. $20,000 from selling the garage we'd owned together for 15 years, the one where I used to restore old Buicks on weekends and where Cassidy kept her baking supplies in the back corner. It was every cent we had, but it was for Maureen, and Maureen deserved the best. Cassidy set down her coffee and looked at me. "We paid for this, Dennis. We belong there." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I know." There was a moment of silence between us, not uncomfortable, but heavy. The kind of silence that settles over a house before something big happens. I'd felt it before in the minutes before a wedding ceremony started, or just before a surprise anniversary party was revealed. It was a special kind of silence before a storm, but I didn't think the storm would be ours. At 6:45, we walked out to the driveway. Our Buick sat there like an old friend 20 years old, dented on the passenger side from a fender bender Cassidy had gotten into in 2010, but the engine was solid. I'd rebuilt it myself 2 years ago. It wasn't flashy. It wouldn't turn heads at the Morrison estate in Grosse Pointe, but it would get us there. Cassidy climbed into the passenger seat and smoothed her dress over her knees. I started the engine. The sun was beginning to rise now, casting long shadows across the empty street. "Ready?" I asked. She nodded. "Ready." I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway. The road to Grosse Pointe was long and quiet at this hour. We didn't talk much. Cassidy stared out the window, and I kept my eyes on the road, thinking about Maureen in her wedding dress, about Carter and his family, about the toast I'd prepared to give at the reception. I thought about how proud I was, how far we'd come, how much we'd sacrificed to give our daughter this day. We drove toward Grosse Pointe. We had no idea we'd be home in 2 hours. Highway 94 stretched ahead of us, empty in the early morning light. The suburbs of Detroit gave way to open fields and scattered trees, their branches still bare from the long Michigan winter. Cassidy sat quietly beside me, her hands folded in her lap. The radio was off. We didn't need music. The hum of the Buick's engine was enough. I glanced at her once, and she smiled small but genuine. "The cake turned out perfect," she said. 3 tiers, buttercream frosting with edible orchids. I stayed up until midnight, making sure the petals looked real. I nodded. "Maureen will love it." And I believed it. I believed she would love everything we'd done for her. The road curved gently through the countryside, past old farmhouses and newly built subdivisions. I'd driven this route before, years ago when Maureen was 10, and we'd taken her to the art museum in Ann Arbor. She'd held my hand the whole way through the galleries, pointing at paintings and asking questions. On the drive home, she'd fallen asleep in the back seat, and when I carried her inside, she'd woken up just long enough to whisper, "Daddy, you're my hero." I'd never forgotten that. I wondered if she still thought of me that way. The landscape began to change as we neared Grosse Pointe. The fields disappeared, replaced by wide lawns and towering oak trees. The houses grew larger, set back from the road behind stone walls and iron gates. This was old money, quiet, polished, untouchable. I'd coordinated events in places like this before, but I'd never belonged here. I was the man in the kitchen, the one who made sure the shrimp were cold and the champagne was chilled. I didn't get invited to stay for dinner, but today was different. Today I was the father of the bride. At 7:40, I turned onto Morrison Lane. The road narrowed, lined with hedges trimmed into perfect geometric shapes. At the end of the lane stood the Morrison estate, a sprawling white mansion with tall columns, and a slate roof that gleamed in the morning sun. I'd seen photos, but seeing it in person was something else. It looked like a place out of a movie, the kind of place where people in tailored suits sipped cocktails on the terrace and never worried about money. I slowed the Buick as we approached the gate. It was iron 12 feet tall, with intricate scrollwork, and the Morrison family crest welded into the center. Beyond the gate, I could see the circular driveway, the marble fountain, the steps leading up to the mansion's front entrance. But the gate was closed. I pulled up to the intercom and rolled down my window. A young man in a black uniform stepped out of the guardhouse. His name tag read, "Steve." "Good morning," I said. "Dennis Bennett, father of the bride." Steve didn't smile. He glanced down at a clipboard, then back at me. "Hold on a second." He walked to the gate and bent down, inspecting something near the base. Then he straightened and walked back toward my window, his expression flat. "I'm sorry, sir," Steve said. "You're not on the list." I frowned. "That's impossible. I'm paying for the wedding." Steve didn't answer. He just pointed. I followed his gesture and saw a laminated sheet of paper taped to the side of the guardhouse, right at eye level. On it were two photographs, one of me, one of Cassidy. They were old pictures taken maybe 5 years ago at a family barbecue. Our faces were grainy and large to the point of distortion. Beneath the photos in bold black letters were the words, "Do not admit, security risk." The world went silent. I stared at the sign, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. My own face, my wife's face, marked like criminals. Beside me, Cassidy gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. What is this?" she whispered. Steve shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just following orders, ma'am." I couldn't speak. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Steve knocked twice on the hood of the Buick, the sound echoing like a gavel. "Time to go," he said. I looked up. On the second-floor balcony of the Morrison estate, I saw her. Maureen. She stood beside Penelope Ashford, in that dress, the wedding dress we'd paid for. $15,000. Custom-made silk with hand-sewn pearls that caught the morning light like tiny stars. It was the most beautiful dress I'd ever seen, and Maureen wore it like armor. She wasn't surprised to see us at the gate. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't ashamed. She was smiling. Maureen leaned over the wrought iron railing of the balcony, her champagne flute balanced delicately in one hand. She turned to Penelope Carter's mother, the woman who'd barely spoken to us during the rehearsal dinner, and pointed down toward our Buick. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw Penelope's reaction. The older woman threw her head back and laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a full, sharp laugh that carried across the manicured lawn. Maureen raised her glass. She looked directly at us and lifted the champagne flute in a toast. The gesture was slow, deliberate, mocking. She tilted her head slightly as if to say goodbye. "Thank you for leaving." Then she drank. I couldn't move. My body had turned to stone. My hands were still on the steering wheel, but I couldn't feel them. I couldn't feel anything except the cold, hollow ache spreading through my chest. This was my daughter. The girl I'd rocked to sleep when she had nightmares. The girl I'd taught to ride a bike, to tie her shoes, to make scrambled eggs without burning them. The girl who'd once told me I was her hero. She was toasting our humiliation. Beside me, Cassidy made a sound, small, broken. I turned and saw tears streaming down her face. She wasn't sobbing. She wasn't gasping for breath. She was just crying silent, and still staring up at the balcony where our daughter stood, in the dress we'd bought, her celebrating the fact that we weren't welcome at her wedding. "Cass," I said quietly. She didn't answer. She just closed her eyes and turned her face away. I looked back up at the balcony one more time. Maureen had already turned away, laughing at something Penelope said. She didn't look back. She didn't wave. She didn't even glance in our direction. To her, we were already gone, already forgotten. Steve, the security guard, knocked on the hood of the Buick again. His face was neutral, professional. He didn't enjoy this, but he didn't care either. Sir, he said, you need to leave. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I didn't demand to speak to my daughter or ask for an explanation. There was no point. The sign said it all. The smile said it all. The toast said it all. I put the car in reverse and backed away from the gate. The tires crunched over the gravel driveway, and for a moment the only sound was the engine idling and Cassidy's quiet breathing beside me. I turned the Buick around slowly, carefully, the way I'd been taught to drive 45 years ago, smooth, controlled, deliberate. As we pulled away from the Morrison estate, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The mansion was still there, white and pristine against the blue sky. The gate was still closed. And on the second-floor balcony, I could just barely see the outline of two figures, Maureen and Penelope, still laughing. I turned my eyes back to the road. Cass, I said again. My voice was steady now, calm. Let's go. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and nodded. Okay, she whispered. I drove down Morrison Lane, past the hedges and the oak trees and the big houses with their iron gates and stone walls. I didn't speed. I didn't slam on the brakes. I just drove. But my mind was working fast, running through a list of names, numbers, contracts. I'd been coordinating events for 40 years. I knew how things worked. I knew how things broke. I reached over and took Cassidy's hand. We're going home, I said, and I'm going to make 3 phone calls. 10 minutes of silence passed before I spoke. We were back on Highway 94, heading west toward Detroit. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, and the morning light that had seemed so hopeful an hour ago now felt harsh and exposing. Cassidy sat beside me, staring out the window at nothing. Her hands were folded in her lap, still and pale. She hadn't said a word since we'd left the Morrison estate. Neither had I. But my mind hadn't stopped working. Finally, Cassidy turned to me. Her voice was small, fragile. What are we going to do? I didn't answer right away. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up, casting a faint blue glow across the dashboard. I scrolled through my contacts slowly, deliberately, until I found the name I was looking for. Tony Rodriguez. I'd trained him 15 years ago when he was washing dishes in the back kitchen of a country club banquet hall. Now he managed the whole team: servers, bartenders, line cooks. He was good, loyal, professional. And today he was running the catering service at Maureen's wedding. I pressed the call button and held the phone to my ear. It rang twice before Tony picked up. Mr. Bennett. His voice was bright, energetic. He sounded like a man who was proud of his work and ready to deliver. Everything's ready here, sir. The pheasants are perfect. The wine's been chilling since 6 this morning. We're just waiting for the ceremony to finish, and then we'll start service at... Tony, I interrupted. My voice was calm, flat. Switched to commercial terms, immediately. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the background noise of a busy kitchen, clattering pans running, water voices calling orders. Then Tony spoke again, quieter, this time. Sir... Section 4.2 of the contract, I said. Force majeure clause. I am not present at the venue. As the primary contract holder, my absence voids the existing payment terms. All services revert to commercial basis. Cash on delivery. Another pause. Longer this time. Mr. Bennett, Tony said carefully, are you saying... I'm saying you stop service until payment is received. I said. Full payment, in cash. $6,500 for the venue catering. $12,000 for the premium wine we ordered separately. $18,500 total. They pay, or you pack up and leave. I heard Tony inhale sharply. Sir, the wedding's in 2 hours. The guests are already arriving. If I stop service now, then stop it now, I said. My tone didn't change. It was still calm, still professional. Stop the wine service. Stop the appetizers. Don't put out a single canapé until someone hands you $18,500 in cash. Do you understand? There was a long silence. I could picture Tony standing in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, trying to process what I was telling him. He'd worked with me for years. He knew I didn't joke about contracts. He knew I didn't make threats I wouldn't follow through on. Mr. Bennett, Tony said slowly, if I do this, if I stop service at a wedding, it's going to be chaos. The bride's family, the groom's family, they're going to lose their minds. They're going to blame me. They're going to blame you. Let them, I said. But sir, Tony. I kept my voice steady, but there was steel beneath it now. You work for me, not for the bride, not for the groom, not for their families. You work for me, and I'm telling you to stop service until payment is received. That's the contract. That's the law. If they have a problem with it, they can take it up with their lawyer. But you don't serve a single drink. You don't plate a single dish until they pay. Understood. Another pause, then quietly, yes, sir. Good, I said. Call me when it's done. I ended the call and set the phone down on the center console. My hand was steady. My breathing was steady. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret. Just a cold, clear sense of purpose. Cassidy was staring at me. Dennis, she whispered, what did you just do? I looked at her. My wife. The woman who'd stood beside me for 30-odd years, who'd baked a wedding cake until midnight, who'd cried silent tears on a balcony while our daughter toasted our humiliation. I stopped being a father, I said. Service providers only work for money. The second call. Henry Morrison. I scrolled to his name in my contacts. The man who owned the estate where my daughter was getting married. The man whose property insurance depended on accurate guest lists and signed contracts. I'd met Henry twice before, once during the venue tour and once when I signed the rental agreement. He was a businessman. Practical. Direct. He'd understand what I was about to tell him. I pressed call. He picked up on the first ring. Dennis. His voice was loud, friendly. Is everything okay? I thought you'd be here by now. The ceremony's starting in... Henry. I interrupted. My voice was calm, but there was no warmth in it. Maureen lied to you. She told your staff the estate belongs to her. There was a beat of silence. Then what? She put up a sign at the gate, I said. With our pictures. Said we weren't allowed in. She told people we were a security risk. But the rental contract is in my name. I signed it. I paid the deposit, and I am not present at the venue. Wait, hold on. Henry's tone had shifted. The friendliness was gone. You're not there. You're the primary contract holder. If you're not on site, then the insurance is void, I finished. Any damage, any liability, any accident that happens today, it falls on you personally. Not the policy. You. I heard Henry suck in a sharp breath. Dennis, are you telling me? I'm telling you that my daughter banned me from the wedding I paid for, I said. I'm telling you she lied about owning your property. And I'm telling you that as of this moment, I am not present, I am not consenting, and your venue insurance does not cover this event. There was a long pause. I could hear muffled voices in the background. Henry must have been near the ceremony site. Then he spoke again, and his voice was hard. Do what you need to do. I'd said the words to Tony. Now Henry was saying them back to me. I'm coming with my security team, Henry said. If she lied to me, if she forged documents or misrepresented ownership, I'm shutting this down. Right now. I'm not risking my property for some kid's fantasy wedding. Understood, I said. Dennis. Henry hesitated. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Now you do. I ended the call and set the phone down in my lap. My hands were still steady. My pulse was still calm. I'd made 2 calls in less than 10 minutes, and I'd just guaranteed that my daughter's wedding would collapse before the vows were spoken. I should have felt something, guilt, regret, doubt. But I didn't. All I felt was the cold clarity of a man who'd spent 40 years making sure events ran smoothly and who now knew exactly how to make one fall apart. Cassidy was still staring at me. She hadn't said a word since I'd finished the call with Tony. The third call? She asked quietly. Later, I said. Right now we're going home. We pulled into our driveway at noon. The apartment building looked exactly the way it had when we'd left that morning, squat brick, unremarkable. Our unit was on the second floor, number 2B, with a small balcony overlooking the parking lot. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't Grosse Pointe. But it was ours. We'd lived here for 23 years. Ray's Maureen here hosted Christmas dinners and birthday parties, and Sunday breakfasts in the little kitchen with the chip tile countertops. I turned off the engine and sat in the silence. Cassidy turned to me. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, but her voice was steady when she spoke. The money, she said. The $75,000. What about it? I looked at her. It's gone, I said. Her eyes widened. Gone? I transferred it this morning, I said, at 7 o'clock, before we left. All of it, my $30,000, your $25,000, the $20,000 from the garage. $75,000. I sent it to Detroit Grace Hospice. Cassidy stared at me. For a moment she didn't move, didn't blink. Then slowly she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "That was all. Just okay. No anger, no questions. She trusted me. Even now, especially now, she trusted me. I reached over and took her hand. "I don't know what's going to happen next," I said. "I don't know if Maureen will call, or if she'll come here, or if she'll hate us forever. But I know one thing." "What's that?" Cassidy asked. "I know exactly what's happening at Morrison Estate right now," I said. 40 years in this business taught me how a wedding collapses when the money disappears. At Morrison Estate the clock struck noon. The guests were seated at their tables, champagne flutes poised, faces turned expectantly toward the front of the room, where Maureen stood beside Carter beneath an arch woven with white orchids and trailing ivy. The ceremony had ended 10 minutes ago, brief, polished, perfect. Now it was time for the reception. Time for toasts and laughter, and the kind of celebration that people would remember for years. The orchestra played Vivaldi, the notes crisp and elegant, drifting across the manicured lawn, and through the open French doors of the estate's grand hall. Maureen looked radiant. Her smile was wide and unguarded, her hand clasped tightly in Carter's. She was everything a bride should be, glowing, triumphant, untouchable. But something was wrong. The servers were moving strangely. Instead of gliding smoothly between tables with trays of canapes and glasses of champagne, they were hesitating, glancing toward the kitchen entrance, their movements stiff and uncertain. A few guests noticed. They frowned, murmured to one another, but no one said anything. Not yet. Then Tony Rodriguez appeared. He crossed the floor with long, deliberate strides, his expression neutral but his jaw tight. He wore the crisp white shirt and black vest of a catering manager, but there was something in his posture, something rigid and uncompromising, that made heads turn. He reached the center of the room and raised one hand. The gesture was small, almost casual, but every server in the hall saw it. They stopped. One by one the waiters set down their trays. They stepped back from the tables, their faces serious, their hands folded behind their backs. A server near the bar reached out and quietly removed a bottle of champagne from a guest's reach, setting it back on the counter. The music stopped. The violinist lowered her bow mid-phrase. The cellist's hand stilled on the strings. The silence that followed was sudden and total, broken only by the soft clink of silverware against china, as confused guests set down their forks. Maureen's smile faltered. "What's happening?" she said. Her voice was sharp, carrying across the hall. "Why did the music stop? Where's the champagne?" Tony didn't answer her. He turned instead toward the head table where Penelope Ashford sat in a pale blue suit. Her expression caught somewhere between confusion and irritation. He walked toward her slowly, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. "Mrs. Ashford," Tony said. His voice was calm, professional, but there was no warmth in it. "We're experiencing a difficulty." Penelope frowned. "A difficulty? What kind of difficulty?" "A technical difficulty," Tony said smoothly. "We're having trouble accessing our inventory." "I don't understand." Penelope's frown deepened. "What does that mean?" Tony reached into the pocket of his vest and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly, deliberately, and held it out toward her. "It means," Tony said, "that service has been suspended pending payment resolution." Penelope stared at him. "Payment? What are you talking about? Everything's been paid for." "No, ma'am," Tony said. "It hasn't." Maureen was standing now, her bouquet clutched in one hand, her face flushed. "What is this? What's going on?" Tony didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Penelope. "The contract for catering services was signed by Dennis Bennett," Tony said. "As the primary contract holder, Mr. Bennett's presence at the venue was a condition of our service agreement. Mr. Bennett is not present. Therefore, all services have reverted to commercial terms. Cash on delivery." The hall was silent. Every guest was watching now, their faces a mix of confusion and dawning alarm. Maureen's hand went to her throat. Carter stood frozen beside her, his mouth slightly open. Penelope's face had gone pale. "This is absurd. You can't just—" "I can," Tony said. His tone was polite but unyielding. "And I have." He held out the paper to Penny. "Amount due," Tony said. $6,500. Immediate payment. Card or cash." Penny snatched the paper from Tony's hand. Her eyes scanned the invoice, and for a moment her face went completely blank. Then the color flooded back red, furious, disbelieving. $6,500, she shrieked. "You want $6,500? Right now, in 1 hour." Tony didn't flinch. "Immediate payment, ma'am. Yes." The whispers started, then low, at first like the rustle of leaves before a storm. Guests leaned toward one another, their faces confused, scandalized. A woman in a pale pink dress gasped. A man in a gray suit pulled out his phone and started typing. Within seconds, the murmurs grew louder, spreading from table to table like wildfire. Maureen pushed past Carter and strode toward Tony, her veil trailing behind her like a torn banner. Her face was flushed, her jaw tight. "This is insane," she hissed. "My parents paid for everything. The catering, the wine, the flowers, everything. You can't just—" "Your parents," Tony interrupted, his voice calm and cold, "are not present. The primary account holder has left the venue. Per the contract, all services revert to commercial terms. Force majeure." Maureen's eyes flashed. "I don't care about your contract. I'll have you fired. I'll have you until payment is received." Tony said louder now, his voice carrying across the hall. "All services are suspended." He turned and raised his hand again, the same gesture he'd used before. And just like before, every server in the room responded. They moved as one. 30 people, waiters, bartenders, line cooks in white aprons, stepped back from the tables, set down their trays, and began walking toward the kitchen entrance. No one ran. No one looked back. They simply filed out, one by one, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Maureen stood frozen, her mouth open. Penny was screaming now. "You can't do this. You can't just leave. We have 200 guests. We have—" But the staff was already gone. The guests sat alone at their tables, staring at one another in stunned silence. The champagne glasses were empty. The appetizer plates were bare. The wedding cake, 3 tiers of buttercream and edible orchids, sat untouched on its pedestal in the corner, forgotten. Then the lights went out. The chandelier overhead flickered once, twice, and died. The soft glow of the sconces along the walls vanished. The only light left was the pale afternoon sun streaming through the French doors, and even that seemed dim and gray. Someone screamed. The fountain in the courtyard, the marble fountain with its tiered bowls and cascading water, sputtered and went silent. The hum of the estate's air conditioning system shut off. The entire building seemed to hold its breath. And then came the barking. It was loud, guttural, aggressive, the deep echoing bark of large dogs. Not one, not two, a pack. The sound came from the front entrance, growing closer with every passing second. Guests turned in their seats, their faces pale, their hands gripping the edges of the tables. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, 3 of them sweeping across the hall like searchlights. Behind the beams, figures emerged, tall, broad-shouldered men in dark uniforms. And at the front of the group, unmistakable, even in silhouette, was Henry Morrison. He wore a camouflage hunting jacket and heavy boots caked with mud. In one hand he held a flashlight. In the other he held the leash of a massive German shepherd. Its teeth bared, its eyes fixed on the crowd. 2 more dogs flanked him, straining against their handlers' grips, their barks echoing off the marble floors. The guests scrambled to their feet. Chairs clattered backward. A woman screamed again. A man shouted something about calling the police. Penny was yelling, but her voice was drowned out by the chaos. Henry stepped into the center of the hall. He swept the flashlight across the room slowly, deliberately, letting it linger on the faces of the guests, before finally settling on the couple at the front. Maureen and Carter stood frozen beneath the orchid arch. Their hands still clasped, their faces white with shock. Henry shone the flashlight directly on them. "Who's responsible here?" he said. His voice was low, rough, and cold as stone. Carter tried to stand, his legs buckled. He caught himself against the edge of the orchid arch, his hand gripping the white wood so tightly his knuckles turned bone pale. Maureen reached for him, but he pulled away, his eyes locked on Henry Morrison and the beam of the flashlight that cut through the darkness like a blade. Penny stepped forward, her voice sharp and brittle. "This is private property. Get those dogs out of here right now, or I'll—" "Private property." Henry's voice boomed across the hall, silencing her mid-threat. He took a step closer, the German shepherd at his side, growling low in its throat. "This is my property. Who the hell are you?" Penny's face flushed. "I'm Penelope Ashford. This is my daughter-in-law's house. She's the owner. You have no right—" "Owner?" Henry turned his flashlight on Maureen. The beam hit her face, and she flinched, raising one hand to shield her eyes. "Is that what you told them? That you own this estate?" Maureen didn't answer. She stood frozen beneath the orchid arch, her veil hanging limp over her shoulders, her bouquet crushed in her trembling hands. "Tell them," Henry said. His voice was quieter now, but there was steel in it. "Tell them whose house this is." Maureen's lips parted. No sound came out. "Tell them!" Henry roared. It's rented?" Maureen whispered. The silence that followed was deafening. "What?" Penny's voice cracked. "What did you say?" "It's rented," Maureen said again, louder this time. "I rented it for the wedding." Henry nodded slowly. "That's right. She rented it, signed a one-day contract, paid a deposit, and the contract was co-signed by her father, Dennis Bennett, who was not present. Which means legally this event is unsanctioned. The insurance is void, and I am well within my rights to shut this down." He swept the flashlight across the room, illuminating the shocked faces of the guests. "It's a rental!" someone shouted from the back. "She lied about owning it." The whispers exploded into shouts. Guests turned to one another, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of disbelief and outrage. Phones were raised. Camera flashes lit up the darkened hall. A woman near the back stood up and started gathering her purse. Penny whirled on Maureen. "You lied. You told us this was your house. You said your parents owned property in Grosse Pointe. You said—" "I never said they owned it," Maureen shouted back. I just said we'd have the wedding here. I didn't think it mattered." "Didn't think it mattered." Henry raised his hand and the dog stopped growling. The silence was immediate. "Here's what matters," Henry said. "The contract is void. You have 30 minutes to vacate the premises. After that, I release the dogs. Security will escort anyone who remains." "Understood." Panic erupted. Guests scrambled to their feet, knocking over chairs, grabbing coats and purses. The woman in the pink dress was crying. A man in a tuxedo was yelling into his phone. The elderly couple near the fountain were already halfway to the door. And then Carter grabbed Maureen by the arm. He spun her around, his face twisted with fury. "You lied," he shouted. "You told me this was your house. You said your parents had millions. You said they'd take care of everything." Maureen's eyes were wide, terrified. "They will. My mother. She'll pay. She always pays. She'll—" "No, she won't." Carter's voice broke. "Because there's nothing to pay with. Don't you get it? We're broke? Maureen. My family is broke." Maureen stared at him. "What?" "We can't pay for this," Carter said. "We can't pay for anything. My mother's been lying to you. We've been lying to you. We don't have money. We don't have anything." "No," Maureen whispered. "No, that's not. You said—" Carter laughed. It was a hollow, bitter sound. "The estate's been sold," he said. "My father's stocks are worthless. We owe the bank $600,000. My mother's been dodging creditors for 2 years. We're bankrupt, Maureen. We've been bankrupt since before we met." Maureen's face had gone white. "Then why did I marry you?" Carter's smile was cruel. "Because we thought your parents had money. You kept talking about how they'd been in the business for 40 years, how they were paying for the wedding, how they'd help us get back on our feet. We thought they'd save us. We thought you'd be the answer." He let go of her arm and stepped back, his hands raised in mock surrender. "Turns out," Carter said, "we were both wrong." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Maureen stood there on the grass, her $15,000 dress dragging through the mud, the hem torn and filthy. She stared at Carter, her mouth open, her eyes wide and uncomprehending. Around them, the last of the wedding guests were fleeing toward the parking lot, their voices a distant blur of panic and disgust. But Maureen didn't seem to notice. She was frozen, locked in place, as if the ground beneath her had turned to quicksand. "Bankrupt," she whispered. Her voice was small, broken. But the estate, Penny's stocks, the trust fund, you said—" Carter laughed. It was sharp and ugly, a sound that belonged nowhere near a wedding. He took a step toward her, and she flinched. "Your parents were the gold mine," he said. His voice was loud, now venomous. "Not us. Your stupid, hard-working, blue-collar parents who spent 40 years kissing rich people's asses so their daughter could have a better life. We thought they'd made a fortune doing it. We thought they'd hand it over without a fight." He bent down and grabbed an empty wine bottle from the grass. One of the bottles the servers had abandoned when they'd walked out. He turned and hurled it toward the fountain. It shattered against the marble with a violent crack. "But they didn't," Carter snarled. "Because there's nothing to hand over. Because you lied to us just like we lied to you." Maureen's face crumpled. I didn't lie. You—" Carter jabbed a finger at her. his face twisted with rage. "You're worthless. A liar. You sold us a fantasy and we bought it like idiots. And now we're stuck with nothing. No money, no bailout, and a wife who doesn't even have the decency to—" "Carter!" Penny's voice cut through his rant like a knife. She stood a few feet away, her pale blue suit smudged with dust, her face pale but composed. "We're leaving. Now." Carter turned to her. "What about—" "Forget her," Penny said coldly. She pulled her phone from her purse and glanced at the screen. "The bank called. We have 48 hours before they foreclose on the condo. We need to go." Carter looked back at Maureen one last time. She was still standing there, trembling, tears streaming down her face. For a moment something flickered in his expression, maybe guilt, maybe regret. But then it hardened again. "Let her rot," he said. He turned and walked away. Penny followed without a backward glance. Their footsteps crunched across the gravel driveway, fading into the distance, until there was nothing left but silence. Maureen stood alone on the lawn. The estate was empty now. The guests were gone. The servers were gone. Henry Morrison and his security team had retreated to the main house, leaving the wreckage of the wedding behind, like the aftermath of a storm. The orchid arch stood tilted and abandoned its flowers, wilting in the afternoon heat. Maureen sank to her knees. Her dress pooled around her in the dirt. Her veil slipped off and caught on a branch, tearing down the middle. She looked down at her feet and realized dimly that she'd lost her shoes. Her feet were bare-cut and bleeding from walking across the gravel and broken glass. She didn't know how long she sat there, minutes maybe, or hours. Time had stopped meaning anything. Then she heard an engine. She looked up and saw a taxi idling near the edge of the driveway. The driver, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache, was leaning out the window talking to someone, a wedding photographer. The man had a camera around his neck and was gesturing wildly, probably complaining about unpaid invoices. Maureen scrambled to her feet. "Stop!" she screamed. Her voice cracked raw and desperate. "Wait!" She ran toward the taxi, her dress dragging behind her, her bare feet slapping against the pavement. The driver turned startled, and Maureen grabbed the door handle before he could pull away. "Detroit," she gasped. "Take me to Detroit. I'll pay triple fare. Just please. Please take me." The driver looked her up and down the torn dress, the bleeding feet, the mascara streaked down her face. He hesitated. "Triple ma," he said. "Yes," Maureen said. "I swear. Just get me out of here." The driver glanced at the photographer, who shrugged and walked away. Then he unlocked the door. "Get in." Maureen collapsed into the back seat. She gave him the address, her parents' apartment in Detroit, the one she'd lived in for 20 years, the one she'd told Carter was embarrassing and beneath her. The driver punched it into his GPS and pulled away from the Morrison estate without another word. The taxi sped toward Detroit, carrying my daughter back toward the home she'd tried to erase. Meanwhile, Cassidy and I sat at the kitchen table. 8 o'clock in the evening? The tea we'd made hours ago had gone cold. Neither of us had touched it. The cup sat between us on the chip tile counter. Steam long since evaporated the liquid, dark and still. We didn't speak. We didn't turn on the television or the radio. We just sat there in the quiet apartment, waiting. I looked at Cassidy. Her face was calm, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands were folded tightly in her lap. "Are we being cruel?" I asked quietly. Cassidy looked at me. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. Cruel, she said, was putting our pictures on a sign that said security risk. Cruel was making us drive an hour to our daughter's wedding and turning us away at the gate. Cruel was toasting our humiliation from a balcony while we sat in a 20-year-old car, wondering what we'd done wrong. Her voice was steady, but there were tears in her eyes. "What we're doing," Cassidy said, "isn't cruel. It's consequence." I nodded. I wanted to believe her. But sitting there in the dim light of our small kitchen, I felt the weight of it pressing down on my chest. Then the elevator dinged. The sound echoed down the hallway, sharp, metallic, unmistakable. I heard voices immediately, shouting, multiple voices overlapping, growing louder as they approached our door. Cassidy and I looked at each other. "It's begun," she whispered. I stood slowly and walked to the door. My heart was pounding. I stopped at the peephole and looked through. All three of them. Maureen stood in the center, her wedding dress torn and filthy mascara streaked down her face. On her left was Carter, his shirt untucked, his tie hanging loose. On her right was Penny, her pale blue suit smudged with dirt, one button missing from her jacket. They looked like refugees from a disaster zone. Before I could step back, they saw the peephole darken. "Dad!" Maureen screamed. "I know you're there. Open the door." She pounded on the wood with both fists. Carter joined her, his fists hammering against the frame. Penny was shouting something about fraud and lawsuits. I reached for the doorknob, then stopped. My hand hovered over the lock. Slowly, deliberately, I slid the chain into place. Then I opened the door 5 inches. The gap revealed their faces, wild, desperate, furious. Maureen lunged forward, immediately slamming her hands against the door, trying to push it open. The chain rattled violently, but held. "Mom, Dad!" she screamed. "Let me in! Let me in!" Carter grabbed the door handle and yanked. "Open this door! You owe us. You destroyed our wedding. You owe us compensation, a dowry, something." "You frauds!" Penny shrieked. "You ruined our lives. Where's the money?" I stood there looking at them through the narrow opening. My voice was calm. "Go away," I said. "There's nothing for you here." "Nothing!" Maureen's voice cracked. She was shaking her bare feet, bleeding on the hallway tile. "You can't do this. I'm your daughter. I need to come home." "You made your choice," I said. "No." Tears streamed down her face. "You don't understand. Carter's family is bankrupt. They lied to me. They used me. The wedding collapsed. Everyone saw. The dogs. The security. Henry Morrison threw us out. I have nowhere to go." I looked at her. Really looked at her. The torn dress, the bleeding feet, the terror in her eyes. "I know," I said. The hallway went silent. Maureen stared at me, her mouth open. Carter's hand, gripping the doorframe, went slack. Even Penny stopped shouting. "What?" Maureen whispered. "I know," I said again. "I know about the dogs. I know about Henry. I know Carter's family is bankrupt. I know all of it, Maureen." Her face went pale. You knew, and you just let it happen. You let them humiliate me." Behind me, Cassidy appeared in the doorway. She stood beside me, her hand resting on my shoulder, her face cold and composed. "Yes," I said, "we let it happen." "How could you?" Maureen screamed. "I'm your daughter. You're supposed to protect me. You can't." She broke off sobbing. Then her face changed. Calculation flickered across her features. "Hope." "Wait," she said, her voice suddenly softer. "Wait, please. I have to tell you something important." She pressed her face against the gap, her eyes locking onto mine. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. I didn't answer. I just turned, walked to the kitchen table, and opened the drawer. "Maureen," I said, pulling out a white envelope. "Read this." Penny grabbed the envelope. She snatched it from the floor before Maureen could react, her fingers closing around it like a vice. Maureen lunged for it, her arm stretching through the gap, but Penny stepped back out of reach. "Don't!" Maureen screamed. "That's mine. You can't." Penny tore it open. The sound of ripping paper echoed down the hallway. She pulled out the letter, her eyes scanning the text rapidly. For a moment her face went completely blank. Then the color drained from it. Carter grabbed her shoulder. What does it say?" Penny's hands trembled. Then she began to read aloud, her voice cold and mechanical. "Dear Ms. Bennett, this letter serves as a reminder for your 3-year contraceptive implant follow-up appointment. Device installed, April 20th. Her voice broke. 1 month ago." She looked up, her eyes blazing. "Contraceptive implant." Penny's voice cracked like a whip. 1 month before the wedding." Carter's face went white. He turned to Maureen, his mouth hanging open. "Birth control," he whispered. You have birth control, but we were trying. You said you wanted a baby. You said you told me." "It's a mistake," Maureen stammered. "The letter's wrong. I can explain." "A mistake," Penny screamed. She crumpled the letter in her fist. A 3-year implant isn't a mistake. Carter grabbed Maureen's arm through the gap. You lied about everything. The house, your parents' money, and now, a baby? Let go. You lying, bitch. Penny swung her purse. It was heavy leather with metal clasps, and it connected with Maureen's shoulder with a solid thud. Maureen screamed. I slammed the door shut. The sound was like a gunshot. The chain rattled as the door hit the frame, and suddenly there was a solid wall of wood between us and the chaos outside. But we could still hear them. You ruined us. Penny's voice muffled but vicious. You ruined everything. I didn't... Mom, please... Oh. The sound of something hitting the wall. A body, maybe, or a fist. More screaming, Maureen's voice high and terrified. Carter shouting. Penny shrieking obscenities. Cassidy stood beside me, her face pale, her hand covering her mouth. Then we heard other voices, doors opening up and down the hallway. Our neighbors, Mrs. Wilson, from 2O, the college students, in 2C, stepping out to see what was happening. What the hell? Someone call the cops. Is she bleeding? I walked to the kitchen and picked up the phone. My hands were steady. I dialed 911. There's a disturbance in my building, I said calmly. 3 people fighting in the hallway. 2nd floor. Yes, I'll stay on the line. 10 minutes later, the sirens arrived. Cassidy and I sat at the kitchen table waiting. We heard the heavy footsteps in the hallway, the authoritative voices, the sharp commands to separate, to calm down, to step back. Then a knock at the door. I stood and walked over. This time I didn't look through the peephole. I didn't slide the chain into place. I just opened it. A police officer stood in the doorway, young, maybe 30, with a crew cut and a name tag that read Murphy. Behind him I could see a sergeant taking statements. And beyond that, near the stairwell, were Carter, Penny, and Maureen separated now, each standing with their arms crossed, their faces flushed and furious. Maureen's shoulder was bruised. Penny's jacket was torn. Carter had a scratch down his cheek. Officer Murphy looked at me, his expression neutral but tired. Mr. Bennett, he said. Yes. We received a call about a disturbance. These people... He gestured toward the 3 of them. Say you refused to let them into your apartment. They also claim you stole property belonging to them. I looked past Murphy at Maureen. She was staring at me, her eyes red and swollen. Her expression caught somewhere between desperation and rage. Is that what they said? I asked quietly. Murphy nodded. That's what they said. I opened the door fully. No chain this time, no 5-inch gap. I stood in the doorway, Cassidy beside me, and looked Officer Murphy directly in the eye. These 3 people, I said calmly, attempted to force entry into my home. They made threats. They demanded money. I'd like them removed from the building. None of them are registered residents here. None of them were invited. My voice was steady, factual. I could have been ordering coffee. Behind Murphy, Penny exploded. Family! She shrieked. We're family. He's lying. He stole from us. He promised a dowry. $75,000. He transferred it into some fund instead of giving it to us. That's theft. That's... The sergeant, an older man with gray hair and a tired expression, stepped forward. His name tag read Williams. Ma'am, he said quietly, do you have documentation of this promise? A contract, written agreement. Penny's face went red. It was verbal, he promised. At the rehearsal dinner, everyone heard him. A verbal promise isn't legally binding, William said, especially regarding that amount of money. He turned to me. Mr. Bennett, do you wish to file charges? Attempted break-in harassment disturbance. I looked at Maureen. She was leaning against the wall. Now her arms wrapped around herself, her face pale and streaked with tears. She looked small, broken. For a moment, just a moment, I felt something that might have been pity. Then I remembered the sign at the gate. No charges, I said. I just want them to leave. She's my daughter. Maureen's voice cracked. She pushed away from the wall, stumbling toward me. You can't throw me out. I live here. Williams looked at her. Do you have a lease, ma'am? Are you registered as a resident of this building? Maureen hesitated. I used to live here. I moved out last week for the wedding, but this is my home. I grew up here. You can't just... if you're not a registered resident, Williams said, and the current resident. He nodded toward me. Doesn't want you here, then you don't have a legal right to enter the property. But you can take this to civil court if you believe you have a claim, Williams continued. Housing disputes, family disputes, that's for a judge to decide. But right now, you need to leave. Carter stepped forward, his face flushed. We can't leave. We don't have anywhere to go. Her parents? His family, they destroyed our wedding. They sabotaged us. They owe us compensation. Williams's hand moved to his belt, resting on his baton. His voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. Sir, I'm going to say this once. You are currently trespassing. You have been asked to leave by the property resident. If you refuse, I will file charges under Section 20, 1 of the Municipal Code, criminal trespass and failure to vacate. You will be arrested. Do you understand? Carter's mouth opened. No sound came out. Leave now, Williams said, or leave in handcuffs. Your choice. Murphy and another officer stepped forward. They positioned themselves on either side of the 3 Carter Penny Maureen and began walking them toward the elevator. Not roughly, but firmly, with no room for negotiation. Carter was still shouting, This isn't over. We'll sue. We'll take you for everything you... Maureen was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. Penny walked in silence, her jaw clenched, her eyes fixed straight ahead. The elevator doors opened. The officers guided them inside, and then the doors closed. Silence. Williams turned back to me. I apologize for the disturbance, Mr. Bennett. If they return, call us immediately. We'll file a formal trespass warning. After that they show up again, it's an automatic arrest. Thank you, Sergeant, I said. He nodded and walked toward the stairwell. Murphy lingered for a moment. You okay? He asked quietly. Yes, I said. Thank you, officer. Murphy nodded and followed Williams down the hall. I stepped back inside and closed the door. The lock clicked into place. Final. Absolute. Cassidy and I stood in the entryway staring at each other. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. Then the phone rang. I walked to the kitchen and picked it up. Mr. Bennett. A woman's voice, warm and slightly hesitant. This is Emily Richardson from Detroit Grace Hospice. Her voice was trembling. Your donation just came through. I held the phone to my ear, Cassidy standing close beside me, her hand on my shoulder. $75,000, Emily said. Mr. Bennett, do you know what this means? I closed my eyes. Tell me. The elderly woman in room 3, she's 82 years old. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. We can afford her pain medication for the next 6 months. She won't have to suffer. Emily's voice broke, then steadied. The veteran in room 7, he served 2 tours in Vietnam. We can finally give him the comfort care he deserves. Clean sheets every day, hot meals, someone to sit with him when the nightmares come. I heard papers rustling on her end. The roof in the east wing, she continued, the one that's been leaking since last winter. We can fix it before the snow comes. And the 12 patients who were on the waiting list, the ones we had to turn away because we didn't have beds, they can stay now. They don't have to die alone in a county hospital. Cassidy's grip on my shoulder tightened. We were going to name a plaque after you, Emily said quietly. Can we at least... No, I said gently. No names, no plaques. Just write, from parents who love too much and learn to love themselves enough. There was a long pause. Then Emily's voice came back thick with tears. They'll never know who saved them, she whispered. Good, I said. That's how it should be. When I hung up, Cassidy was crying. Not the silent tears from earlier. These were different. Relief. Release. something that felt almost like joy. "We did the right thing," I said. She nodded, unable to speak. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded check. "I sold the garage this afternoon. $20,000. Cash." Cassidy's eyes widened. "Dennis, we don't need it," I said. "Not anymore." I walked to the kitchen table and picked up a glossy brochure. Train tickets. Detroit to the Pacific Northwest. First class. Departure 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. Cost $15,000. I handed it to Cassidy. She stared at it, her hands shaking. "Tomorrow. Tomorrow," I said. "We're leaving Cass. No forwarding address, no phone number, just us and the open road." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Okay," she whispered. "We packed that night. 2 suitcases. That was all. 40 years in this apartment, and everything we needed fit into 2 suitcases. Cassidy found a photo album in the back of the closet. She opened it, her fingers tracing the pictures inside. Maureen as a baby. Maureen's first day of school. Maureen in her high school graduation gown, standing between us, smiling. "Should we take it?" she asked quietly. I looked at the photos. Then I closed the album and set it back on the shelf. "No," I said. "We'll take the memories, not the pictures." Late that night, after Cassidy had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I opened a new email, typed Maureen's address into the recipient field, and then I started writing. "Maureen, we're leaving Detroit, leaving the life you tried to erase us from. You made your choice. We've made ours. If someday you find the little girl who once said, 'Daddy, you're my hero,' if you ever become the person she believed you could be, you'll know where to find us. Not for money, not for apologies. But until then, we're living for ourselves, Dad." I read it over 3 times. My finger hovered over the send button. Then Cassidy's voice came from the doorway. "Are you going to send it?" I looked at her. She was standing in her nightgown, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes soft and sad. I looked back at the screen. Then I pressed delete. "No," I said. Writing it was enough. I closed the laptop, picked up my phone, powered it off, removed the SIM card, and dropped it into the trash can beside the table. Now I said to Cassidy, "We're free." She smiled through her tears. "Free," she whispered back. We barely slept that night. How could we? Tomorrow we were leaving everything behind. But for the first time in 40 years, we were going somewhere just for us. The alarm clock buzzed at 5 in the morning, but we were already awake. Cassidy stood by the window in her traveling clothes, watching the sun rise over Detroit one last time. The sky was pale orange streaked with pink, and the city below was still and quiet. "Ready?" I asked. She turned to me and nodded. "Let's go home," she said. "Home? Not to Detroit," she said softly. "To ourselves." We left the apartment at 6. 2 suitcases. A taxi waiting at the curb. The driver loaded our bags into the trunk without a word, and we climbed into the back seat. I didn't look back. As we pulled away, I handed an envelope to the building manager through the lobby door. Inside were our keys and a note, long-term rental available. Contact landlord. That was all. No forwarding address, no phone number, just a clean break. The train station smelled like coffee and diesel fuel. The departure board flickered overhead, listing destinations I'd only ever seen on maps. Chicago, Montana, Seattle, Portland. Our train was called the Coast to Coast Express. Track 4, departure 8:00 a.m. The conductor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a clipboard, checked our tickets and smiled. "Car 7, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, first class. Tea or coffee this morning?" Cassidy glanced at me, then back at the conductor. "Tea," she said. "With lemon. In a real glass, please?" The conductor nodded. "Of course, ma'am. Welcome aboard." The cabin was small but beautiful. Velvet seats, thick carpet, soft lights that glowed warm against the polished wood paneling. There was a window, wide and clean, that looked out over the platform. Cassidy sat down and exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. The whistle blew, the train lurched forward, and Detroit began to fade. I watched the city slip past the window, familiar streets, old buildings, the apartment complex where we'd lived for 40 years. It grew smaller and smaller until it was just a gray smudge on the horizon. Then it was gone. I pulled out my phone, opened my contacts, scrolled to the names I'd seen 1,000 times. Maureen Bennett, Carter Ashford, Penelope Ashford. I blocked them, all three, one by one. Then I powered off the phone, removed the SIM card, and replaced it with a new one. A new number. A number no one had. A number no one could find. I dropped the old SIM card into the trash bin beside my seat. People ask me if I regret it. Here's what I learned. Love is not infinite, not when it lacks respect. They say blood is thicker than water, but respect is thicker than blood. We gave our daughter roots. We gave her wings. She chose to cut the roots and clip our wings in return. Sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to close the door. We spent 40 years feeding other people, building other people's dreams, hosting other people's celebrations. Now we're feeding ourselves. If you're listening to this and you have parents who sacrifice for you, call them tonight. Don't wait. Don't become my daughter. Be better. Cassidy looked over at me. What are you thinking? I smiled. We just became millionaires. She laughed soft, genuine. Dennis, we're broke. No, I said. We're rich. We have time. We have each other. We have no obligations. No one demanding anything from us. No one taking us for granted. I reached over and took her hand. We're the richest people on this train. The train moved west, through forests and farmland, past rivers and mountains. The Pacific was still days away, but we had nowhere to be. No schedule, no deadline. Just the open track and the endless horizon. Cassidy leaned her head against my shoulder. Outside the world rolled by in shades of green and gold. Do you think we'll ever see her again? She asked quietly. I thought about it. About the girl who'd once called me her hero. About the woman who'd put our pictures on a sign and called us a security risk. I don't know, I said. Maybe. If she finds her way back to who she used to be. Cassidy nodded. And if she doesn't, then we'll still be okay, I said. Because we have each other, and that's enough. She squeezed my hand. And for the first time in 40 years, I believed it. So that's my story. A true story I never thought I'd tell as part of these grandpa stories on the internet. But here we are. Do I have regrets? Yes, I regret it came to this. I regret my daughter became someone who saw her parents as embarrassments. I regret 40 years believing unconditional love meant accepting disrespect. But I don't regret leaving. Here's what I learned. Don't be like me. Don't wait 40 years to realize love without respect is just permission to be hurt. Don't sacrifice your dignity at the altar of family first, if that family doesn't honor your sacrifice. God teaches us to love our neighbors as ourselves. Notice as ourselves, not instead of ourselves. You can't pour from an empty cup. If you're a parent, teach your children gratitude. Teach them that hard work has value, that people who serve them at restaurants or at home deserve respect. If you're a son or daughter with parents who sacrificed for you, who worked double shifts, skipped meals so you could eat, put their dreams on hold for yours, call them tonight. Tell them thank you. Don't let pride or shame make you forget where you came from. This true story doesn't have to be yours. These grandpa stories we share aren't just entertainment. They're warnings, lessons, maps, showing you where the cliffs are. That's why I'm telling this true story. Not for sympathy, but so you can learn from my mistakes. Set boundaries before it's too late. Love yourself enough to walk away when love isn't returned with respect. My train's heading west. Cassidy's beside me. For the first time in 40 years, I'm not building someone else's dream. I'm living my own. These are the grandpa stories that matter, the ones teaching us who we want to be and who we never want to become. Find your freedom before you have to burn everything down to see it. If this story made you think or reminded you of someone to call, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories that dig deep and tell the truth. The most powerful lessons come from the hardest truths.